So, Under the Silver Lake. Now, I'm gonna say this straight up. This movie is kind of weird and kind of wild. And I say that because the first time I watched it, I was so sucked into its surprisingly bizarre universe that by the end of the movie, I felt cold and unsatisfied because of where everything led to. Long story short, I watched it again, and with the information that I had when I first watched it, I saw the movie from a completely different angle. And I love movies that can do that, give you multiple angles to view your experience, and it becomes a more rewarding watch right after you've seen it. Because the question that you ask yourself when you're finished watching the movie is, what was the point of it all? Well, thankfully, my obsessiveness with this movie didn't end because while I don't believe that everything that I interpreted is going to be right, I do think I have a stronger attachment to the movie than I initially did and had fun picking it apart anyway. So I hope to the people out there that have a better idea what this movie communicates more than I do, shows that there are people that are at least willing to even give the movie a chance, even after it wasn't very well received and polarized, but it does have a cult following, so there's that. And also, I will be splitting this video into two parts. The first part will be about Sam, our main character, and the second part will be about how this film criticizes the entertainment industry. Now, I'm not saying that these are the be-all, end-all answers to the film, but it's just things that I personally noticed that I felt were worth mentioning in details. So, by all means, let's take a dive under the Silver Lake. Part 1. Under the Silver Lake introduces us to our main protagonist, Sam, played by Andrew Garfield in what I consider to be his best role thus far in his career. He plays a 33-year-old slacker that falls for a woman living in the same apartment complex as him, and her name is Sarah. They share one brief night that nearly leads to something until the next day when Sarah completely disappears. This drives Sam to go on an extensive quest to find her as the film turns into this very bizarre and strange surreal noir mystery in LA, California. Now, one of the first things to understand about this movie is that it's full of details. Some details are flat out blatant and others are in very different places. And the beauty and enjoyment of this movie is to know which details actually matter and which ones don't. And this is a strategy of the film that I didn't even catch on my first watch. The first time I watched it, this movie had me in the mindset that I knew everything that was happening as the film went on. And my interest was glued into these obvious details, clearly giving me answers of Sarah's disappearance, only for the film to turn around and say, "You're not as smart as you think you are, watch the movie again." Now, in the beginning of Sam's journey, he enters Sarah's now empty apartment the night after, and he sees the double diamond symbol on the wall that means stay quiet. He goes to who he can only be named the Comic Man, played by Patrick Fisher, if you've ever seen Mulholland Drive, who interprets them and numerous other symbols that were used for homeless people years ago to communicate during the Great Depression. Now, what's funny about this is that this film takes place in 2011 during the economic recession in the US during the Obama era, and I'm not really sure how deep that goes, but it's something that I thought was worth bringing up. How this connects with Sam is something that's been lingering in my mind. Around the film's first act, we learn that Sam's been warned that he needs to pay his rent. And throughout his entire trek for Sarah, he still hasn't paid his rent. And as the days are fewer and fewer as he continues to look for Sarah, he's days away from getting kicked out of his apartment. Slowly and surely, this seems to be more apparent. First, his car is towed because he hasn't been making the car payment, and this is followed by several interactions with homeless people. And lastly, there's the homeless king who he encounters and takes Sam where he needs to go. By the end of the film, the homeless king demands answers of why Sam has dog biscuits in his pockets. We'll get to that later. And by the final day that he was supposed to pay his rent, his landlord barges in and he sees the keep quiet symbol, and Sam is on the opposite apartment complex where he can look through it. Now, before I go further, because I don't want to go too far into this, but Sam states that he thought he was going to be something important in life and feels like he might have messed up at certain points.
I feel like you fucked up somewhere a long time ago. You're living the wrong life, like a bad version of the life life you're supposed to have.
Oh man, you're fine.
I used to think that I was gonna be someone that like people cared about, like maybe do something important.
He was most likely has been some sort of whatever important person he was beforehand, and it seemed like he was destined to be homeless no matter what. His original life is gone, and it seems like he's fighting for relevance and purpose, but his impending eventuality can't be escaped. And he hasn't fully accepted that whatever purposeful path that he had is completely gone. It's only until the end of the movie he seems to understand this and realizes that after everything he pursued throughout the film, was it even worth it? And that he's better off homeless and at the very least free from the constraints that he was fighting to keep at the expense of dissatisfaction in his life. Now, recently after watching the movie, the scene when he runs into his ex at a party and she introduces him to her new boyfriend, call me crazy, but doesn't he look like a cleaner, slicked up, more improved version of Sam? And for me, this harkens back to when Sam was saying that he felt like he was supposed to be a more important person than who he is now. It might be a coincidence and me overanalyzing, but it was something about the framing that made me sort of wonder if that was intentional, to have like sort of a mirror image of him. And once again, it just stood out like a sore thumb, and I thought it'd be worth mentioning. And I also like to note that he talks about how much he hates the homeless, and considering the chain of events in the film, it seems like he doesn't realize he's becoming the very thing that he despises. Now, this dog killer is considered a pretty big problem in California, as he or she is responsible for, well, killing dogs. Sam reads a comic book that was written by the comic man after he visits Sarah. The comic is titled same as the movie, and it's about how a failed actor blames all of his failings on dogs, taking out his frustration. He says that no one will be happy until all the dogs are dead. Now, as I mentioned in the previous section, Sam claims that he used to be something important in his life when he was with his friend played by Topher Grace. Another element aside from that is that he projects the sound of barking onto several women. One is Sarah, and the other is some ugly distorted version of Sarah as it seems, and another is a group of women in the bathroom that just start wildly barking at him as he's laying on the floor after he gets kicked in the groin. With these strange encounters of barking humans, what exactly does this even mean? And how does this connect to the dog killer and to Sam and his ex-girlfriend? Well, Sam tells Sarah when they first meet that he gave her dog a treat and that he had a dog once that recently died. And we also learn that Sam was bitten by a dog when he was a child. The important detail that we do learn by the end of the film is that he had an ex-girlfriend that he hoped would come back to him if he gave her dog a treat.
I was waiting for her to take me back. I wanted to give the dog a treat and rub its ears. Just the way I used to, and then everything would be good again.
Could these encounters mean that he's projecting his past failed relationships onto his ex? As we see, he sleeps with as many women as he possibly can, and as he blames his ex, could he just be covering his own failings by lustfully pursuing other women he encounters? This could also be subconsciously what he wants to avoid is a failed relationship, since Sarah herself has a dog as well. He doesn't want it to end the same way it did with his ex. So if anyone is the dog killer, could it possibly be his ex? Since the source of comfort is his reminiscence of his girlfriend is through a dog, hoping things will be the same way they were before. But it seems like it's too late and it's time for him to move on. And also notice that when Sam spends the night with the older woman at the end of the film, she has parrots as pets. Countless parrots, and these parrots symbolize companionship, self-growth, valuing every moment, and expression of happiness. And with that information, you can pretty much see the vague ending making a lot more sense. Like the ending of The Master, it's a happier ending than what it seems. As the Hobo King guides Sam to his next part of his investigation, he points out a coyote they come across. Sam asks if it'll hurt him, and the Hobo King responds that he shouldn't run away from it, he should follow it. Now, a coyote symbolizes several things. One meaning in particular is revealing the truth behind the illusion or chaos. When one comes across a coyote in his or her path, that will mean that there's no need to worry about anything and that a new beginning eventually awaits you. Sam does follow a coyote later in the film that happens to be around his apartment complex, and it leads him to another party. And this one, as we already know, has his ex-girlfriend and her new fiance. They have what seems to be a pretty civil exchange despite how much has changed between them. Now, could this coyote leading Sam back to his ex mean that there's no point in going back to his previous relationship? The one that he will most likely be held on longer for than he needed. She seems happier and more at peace, and realizing that there's no future with him, and the harsh reality that there is no future with her. There's also notes that a coyote is a type of canine, so even though through the element of the dog killer lingers in play, a coyote shows that a new and different path awaits Sam eventually. When Sam's booty call visits him for lunch, she asks,
"What's that smell?"
and this is a reoccurring part of the film and is probably the most apparent part of the film. Every woman Sam encounters wonders about his smell.
"What's that smell?"
Oh, I don't know.
I smell it too.
One woman says it smells like skunk.
But it seems like a nice movie.
You smell that? Smells like skunk. And pot.
A lot of skunks in Los Angeles.
Even the Hobo King says that he doesn't have a good smell on him, or anybody else for that matter.
Some people don't realize this about themselves, but you don't have a good smell about you.
Now, it's pretty clear that the skunk represents his infidelity and that he pretty much reeks of it. The moment where the skunk walks next to him and sprays him confirms the degree of his infidelity. But one thing that stood out to me the most was when Ricky Lindholm's character lends him loads of tomato juice in the bathroom and tells him after their conversation that he smells very, very bad. She also adds that she'll be back when the smell goes away, and she doesn't ever return, and that's like for the rest of the film. This personally stood out to me because it tells me that Sam might have possibly had a chance to have a legitimate relationship with someone else other than his ex, but considering that he has a lustful sexualization of women, the smell of his sins just drives them away. He believes that there are things that more important people know that they hide from lesser important people. He's known by many fans of the films as a very paranoid protagonist. He tells the Topher Grace character that he feels like he's being followed, and the Topher Grace character responds that
the modern persecution complex.
The modern persecution complex is an actual thing. It simply means that you believe that someone is constantly after you. After the 1950s during the Cold War, psychologist Brooke Cannon recorded that the patients believing that they were being followed increased 5 times the rate than normal. Another study by psychiatrist Borat Skoldar and his researchers concluded that demons, ghosts, and witches were sources of influences in persecution and now were replaced by radio waves, television, and computers. And Topher Grace's character also says this.
Who needs witches and werewolves anymore, right? Now we have computers. I swear to God, at the very least, the entire population is suffering from mild paranoia.
It's a pretty vague element of the film, but I believe that Sam is narcissistic enough to believe that he's able to find answers to what went wrong with his life by resorting to deciphering complicated codes when the answer is much more simpler than he denies. He uses his deciphering skills using a Zelda map and a cereal box map, however the heck he was able to pull that off, and he uses them to find out where Sarah is located. But this only leads to him seeing her one more time before she's locked up in her tomb. And this harkens back to him talking to the Hobo King and confessing in a nutshell that he can't let go of the past, and he hopes that his ex-girlfriend will come back to him if he used a dog treat to give to the dog. By the end of the film, Sam learns that Sarah is never coming back to him. His entire journey led to no real answers, and at the very end of the film, he confesses his true internal struggle. He goes home and accepts that there is no real depth or meaning except what we create. And going back to his so-called smell, when he has an affair with the older woman that lives in his apartment complex, she asks what kind of fragrance that he has on, and she guesses that it's called patchouli. This type of plant can be a fragrance, an antiseptic, or an oil. It can also cure depression, it has a naturally sweet smell, it can also heal certain types of wounds. It seems like he's finally let go and has been taking steps to being true to himself. His infidelity seems to have been gone, and despite being homeless, in my opinion, he has a chance to start a new path, even if it involves him either living on the streets or living with an older woman in his apartment complex. And that's part 1 so far. The second part will be looking at the entirety of the universe and its criticism of the entertainment industry. And I'm pretty sure it might take me a while to get to the second part, but I promise that I'll keep working on it. If you have anything to add in this video, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. And once again, like I said, all of this is very subjective. I'm not confirming these to be facts, just things that I noticed in details that I thought were worth sort of bringing up and just sharing my perspective. And also leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.